Teenage Nightmares, short story compilation. My name is Max. I'm 23 and live in a boring town. I guess it suits me since my life has always been pretty boring. At least it was. Up until I started to work the graveyard shift at my local Quick Mart. I took the job as a means to make ends meet, just hoping my degree would eventually pay off. It pretty much consisted of me greeting lonely late-night highway drivers, supplying them with their after-hour caffeine fix, and small talk. Everything went fine for the first few weeks, granted the few tweakers that would come in and steal from time to time. And honestly, looking back, I would take the tweakers stealing a few cupcakes over what would take place my fourth week there. It was my first time working the store all alone. It was a Tuesday night. The place was eerily quiet. I had about 2 customers drive up in the 2 hours I was there. After that, not a single living soul came through. It was around 2 a.m. when it started. I had just finished restocking the candy shelves when I heard a strange noise coming from the stock closet. I knew it was empty, as there was only one way in and one way out, and I had just come from there. My immediate thought was something must have fallen over. I was honestly more annoyed about the mess I'd need to pick up than I was scared of someone being in there. So I walked right on in, ready to fix whatever was damaged. But to my shock, the room was fine. I looked all around the small space. There wasn't a soul in there but me. I eventually gave up and went back to my post at the register filled with anxiety. I never wanted someone to pull into the station so desperately. I can't explain the amount of dread I felt. I could feel eyes watching me from a distance. And then it happened. 3 distinct knocks coming from the stockroom. And these were not subtle knocks. It was 3 loud bangs. I nervously walked over toward the room, not knowing what was on the other side. I reached for the door, but before I could open it, it swung wildly open. I stormed off towards the exit, cursing and screaming along the way. I immediately called my boss to tell him what was going on. His response was baffling. He told me it happened regularly and that I should get used to it. I asked him to at least tell me what it was. He said he never found out, but if I just didn't pay attention to it, it would not bother me. I regretfully listened to him, seeing how I desperately needed the money. A few hours had gone by, as well as a few customers. I began to feel a little more at ease. I remember checking my phone and seeing it was around 4:30 a.m., which meant I only had another hour to go. I began to sweep, mostly to just keep my mind off that damn room. But as my mind began to drift, I was suddenly stopped in my tracks as I saw a shadow sprint past me. I jumped back startled, but before I could do anything, the lights cut out. I fell to the floor in a fetal position, terrified. Then I heard breathing coming from that damn room. At this point, I had enough. I woke up and stumbled around in the dark. I finally found the door. I slowly twisted the handle to open the small space. Inside stood a dark figure. My heart rate began to race. For the first time in my life, I had no idea what I was looking at. His face was deformed and had no teeth and just strands of hair. He looked like something out of a horror movie. I shut the door and locked it, then ran outside and called my boss back. He told me he was aware of the demon in the back room. He told me that's why the graveyard shift was always available. No one would stay longer than a month. I quit that very night. So if you find yourself driving down Highway 49 late at night and see a quick stop station, don't stop. Story number 2. Home Alone. My name's Alex. This story takes place 15 years ago when I was 11 years old. My family had just moved from the city. We were now living in a huge home in the middle of the woods. The house and land it sat on was beautiful. We were surrounded by the forest, and the night skies were a sight. But the basement always had this eerie feeling. I hated going down there. One night when both my parents were working late and my sister was to her friend's house, I was home alone playing video games. I was not afraid to be alone. I had my dad's rifles and my pit bull rocks. But as soon as the sun went down on this particular night, the house took on a creepy feeling. I couldn't help but feel as though someone was watching me from outside my door. I slowly stood up to close my bedroom door fully, but before I could get there, it shut closed on its own. I played it off by telling myself it was a draft, and continued playing my video game. An hour had gone by without an incident, so I got up to go to the bathroom. As I walked through the hallway, fear sank in. I stopped and gasped as I was sure that I saw a face in my parents' room. After I glanced back, it was gone. I ran back to my bedroom. Closing the door behind me, I sat on my bed waiting for something to happen. After 10 grueling minutes, nothing happened. It was quiet, so I stood up to listen better at the door. As I got closer, I could hear growling and heavy breathing from the other side. I immediately stepped back, fearing the worst. Then the door handle began to move. At that moment, my heart sank to my stomach. I couldn't imagine what was on the other side of that door, and I did not want to find out. Luckily for me, my bedroom was on the ground floor with my parents. I jumped through that window as fast as I could, breaking the screen along the way. But as soon as I landed on the ground, I felt even more uneased, as if something was watching me from the trees. I mustered any guts I had left and jumped right back through that window. There was now a cold chill in my room, but not just any cold chill. This felt like I would get hypothermia. Before I could even think, my TV went flying off the stand. It had missed my head by near inches. I ran downstairs and called my dad, crying. All he told me was that it lived in the basement and begged me not to go down there no matter what. He eventually made it home and told me everything. He said that he saw something in the basement. He told me he never said anything because he didn't think anyone would believe him. After this, everything was quiet for a while. A few weeks had gone by with no problems. Up until my sister's birthday. It was the middle of the day, and we were having a barbecue outside. It was a pretty normal day. It was just me, my mom and dad, sister, and her friend. It was a quiet birthday gathering. Everything was normal, until my mom asked me to go down to the basement to grab some more charcoal. Even my dad shot me a look of concern, as only me and him knew about the evil thing lurking down there. But I didn't want to seem scared or weak, so I gave him a nod of approval, letting him know it was okay and I wasn't scared. But on the inside, I was terrified. I eventually made my way to the door that led down into the basement. I was scared but went down the stairway. Each step was painfully dreadful. I stumbled around looking for charcoal, eventually spotting it in the corner. I made my way toward the bag. As I reached for it, I saw a long, skinny hand reach out from behind it. My heart began to race. I was frozen in fear. Its body then began to unravel. I turned and ran for the stairs, but it suddenly grabbed my ankle on the way up. I instantly began to pray, and the thing just let out horrible screams until it let go. I ran for my dad. I told him what happened. He looked me in the eyes and said nothing. The very next day, we moved out and never looked back. To the thing that lives in the basement of 1149 Willowberry, please, never get out. Story number 3. The Video Store Creeper. My name is Jenna. My story takes place in 2007 when I was working at a popular video rental store. It was a pretty normal teenage job. My nights consisted of giving people movie recommendations and offering deals on snacks. Plus, I had perks on new releases and free snacks, so I loved my job at the time. Until he showed up. By he, I mean this creep named James. At first, I thought he was just a lonely nerd. I felt bad for James, so I would chat with him when he would come in. Then one night when the store was empty, James walked in. Normally I wouldn't care, but this time he just looked at me for 10 minutes without moving. I was creeped out, to say the least. I asked him if anything was wrong, but he just continued to look. Eventually I told him to leave. He snapped out of it and walked toward the exit, apologizing on the way out. I brushed that night off as him just having a crush on me and being shy. Besides, James wasn't really a threat. He was about 5'4" and only weighed 135 pounds. I, on the other hand, was 5'7" and weighed about 150 pounds. I wasn't too afraid, plus I grew up with brothers. Anyways, a few days had gone by and James didn't come into the store. I was oddly relieved when he finally showed up. James came in and walked right up to me. I was stunned. I didn't know what he was going to do. He must have seen the look of fear on my face, because he told me not to worry. After I relaxed, he told me that he needed to speak to me outside the store. I was reluctant at first, but my gut told me to go with him, so I did. As soon as we got outside, he told me he was sorry. I chuckled and told him it was fine and that I knew he was just being shy because of the crush. He just looked at me dumbfounded. "What crush?" he asked. Then he told me he was apologizing about his brother. I asked him what he was talking about. He looked shocked and just took off. At this point, I wrote James off as mentally ill because I couldn't make sense of him. Plus, I had to get back to work. It was Friday night in the dead of winter. We was about to be packed. And tonight it was just me, because my coworker no-showed. And after the crazy lines died out, and the last customer of the night left, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. I hated closing alone. It was always scary, but tonight felt different. The only way I could describe it is like knowing you are about to die. I felt like that the whole time. My idiotic way to deal with this was to pop my earphones in and blast my iPod. As I was bopping my head to my cheesy playlist and putting movies away, I saw a shadow from the corner of my eye. I paused my music and stopped what I was doing. I looked all around but saw no one. Then I heard knocking on the glass windows in front of the store. I figured it was someone hoping to make it before closing. I walked up to give them the bad news, that they were 10 minutes too late. But as I got closer, I saw that it was James. When he saw me, he pounded the glass harder. He looked terrified, like he saw a ghost. So I rushed to the door and opened it. As soon as I opened it, he yanked me outside. At first I was kicking and screaming, but then he told me to turn around. And when I turned around, I saw James standing in the store, blood-soaked knife in hand. I turned around confused, and that's when Kurt, James' twin brother, told me he found James' journal and knew what he was planning. Turns out the creep James had a twin. Kurt found his journal, and in it he had planned out my murder. Kurt came to warn me but felt guilty betraying his brother. He figured he would go home and deal with James by showing his parents the book. But when he got home, James wasn't there. So he came running back. And lucky he did. Tonight was the night he was going to kill me. In his journal he wrote, "There's no way she would ever give me a chance. If I can't have her, no one will." He was planning on killing me and then himself. Kurt called the police and we waited. They eventually showed up and detained James. Unfortunately, upon searching the store, they found my coworker Carl. He was in pieces in the store's storage room. I feel bad for Carl to this day. He was a good guy that bit the bullet all because a deranged teenager had a severe crush. Oddly enough, that deranged man's brother was my knight in shining armor. I ended up marrying Kurt, and I'm still with him today. As for James, he was arrested and was later killed in his cell. Hope you enjoyed these stories. All three were written in under 3 hours.